Okay, so there is one thing I did want to talk about, which is this concept of like immersive sims and what they are, and you know, maybe we'll even get into some genres and definitions and such. What does a genre like even really mean? Why does it even matter that you look this stuff up? And the weird sort of thing is that I really came to this more defensive position on what an immersive sim is mostly because of Steam and the fact that the Steam label for immersive sim really just became a thing where people were just like, "Oh, this game is a simulation, and I guess it's immersive, so I'll call it immersive sim." And that's not like really true. I mean, immersive sim has more meaning than the sum of its parts, and it's certainly not a tractor simulator. And that's really why like the definition of genre like actually became important is because I actively cannot find the games that I want to play on Steam, or sometimes other platforms as well. It kind of bleeds over. The problem also comes down to like now I have to like sort of explain what an immersive sim is, and I can think of like I don't know maybe like five different ways to define genre, and in some ways people might take a very literalist definition, right? Like but those weren't really useful because a literalist definition of like action adventure game is like, well, any game with action, any game with adventure, whatever nebulous the terms those are, action adventure game, or like any game with a puzzle and it's now a puzzle game because puzzle game. Those aren't real definitions. And like probably the best example of this is like JRPG. People are like, well, if it's an RPG and they made it in Japan, then I guess it means you that's all kind of bullshit. And like the real reason for that is just games are made like all over the world. So if I made an RPG, but some of us were in the United States, but some of us were in Japan, is it like a half JRPG? There's some games that are known for having like what's called like Eurojank, or just generally like companies in usually Eastern Europe, making games a little bit outside of their the scope they could execute on, so they came out kind of janky. Does that mean like Cyberpunk 77 is Eurojank because it was like made from an Eastern European country and it was kind of janky on release? Like no, like it's not really a definition, especially because games are just made all over the world, unless it's like kind of an indie game or whatever. And even then, like they're called Dark Souls, a JRPG, even though it's an RPG and it's made in Japan. That doesn't really tell anyone about the game, and worse yet, it's gonna like drive people who are like thinking they're gonna be playing like a Persona or like a Final Fantasy to like if they pick up and play Dark Souls, they're just gonna be like annoyed. So going back to the immersive sim, right? Like this is kind of the situation I'm in. We have a bunch of people on Steam calling stuff immersive sims, and they aren't them. And I gotta like wade through it and be like, okay, this isn't. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So if the words in the title aren't descriptive, then what do you use as like your definition for what something is? And I've sort of also seen people come up with like a qualitative approach. They're like, okay, like let's take all the qualities of like what a JRPG is, right? It's turn-based combat, and there's a bunch of people who wearing their entire laundry bin, lining up and like dealing damage to each other or something. I mean, like that's honestly like a pretty good way of doing it because at least you're getting to more element like because you're talking about elements like it's more likely you're going to be touching on things that people actually enjoy. The problem with this is that you're not really touching on like the games itself because now we have to talk about like well Fallout 3 isn't an immersive sim. It's much more of like an RPG, and you have definitely some games like Tim Kaine. I mentioned him as like one of the developers behind Fallout, but also like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. A few of these other games. He's been involved in these projects, and but he has a very specific sort of style of game that he and really I should say his crew would like. I would call it like more like a troika game, right? Like that subscribe to his sort of values. Like it's not the mechanics and the systems that he implemented them. It's what they're all in support of. Those are what make a game, a troika game, if you will. And I think an immersive sim is like better fits in sort of that sort of vein. And in a weird sort of way too, with troika as an example, or like other studios are going to have this too, right? It's very much because like that's what the studio values, But I think immersive sim as a genre is a little bit different because it's not necessarily what like an individual studio values because all the studios that made immersive sims have been shut down. Um, the the thing is that it's what the immersive sim community values. So there's this community of immersive sim developers and also immersive sim players, and like it's this sort of interplay of this community and what they value is what becomes what immersive sim is. So, for instance, like you could say something is immersive sim, but if you didn't put like stealth in there, and you didn't have a no kill option, and you didn't have like 0451 as a door code, I mean, I'm not saying people would say it's not an immersive sim if you really hit all the notes, but you know, come on, like you could get some side eyes. And I mean, when you think about it too, like it is not just a like as an immersive sim, it's not just a collection of mechanics. Because when you really think about it, like Doom 3, which is like a horror game, it has they have door codes in there. November 0451, but still they have door codes. Does that mean it's an immersive sim? No, of course not. It's a first person shooter. I guess sort of what I'm trying to say is that like I think genre definitions really are much more best seen as like cultural definitions. Should a game have a certain tag or a certain be included in a certain genre? You have to be like, okay, well, what's the community say about this? And they'll kind of gatekeep that and in sort of a nice way. Not, I don't think anyone's trying to be overly exclusionary, but at some point, like you also have to realize too that especially right now in the immersive sim community and stuff like that, I can see why there might be defensiveness, and that's because when you don't have a little bit of moderation of like what is and what isn't, it causes problems for the people that actually just want to play games. It's definitely something to like kind of be thinking about, like when you want to call your game something or whatever. Just realize where people are coming from, and that when you are making like an immersive sim and stuff like that, if you want to call it immersive sim, you have to not only respect what you believe an immersive sim is and what I mean, I guess I would say the platonic ideal of an immersive sim is, but you might just have to throw in 0451 in there just to make it clear. And you got to be ready for people to also like just totally can your game. I'm sure there's perfectly fine games that have that immersive sim tag that aren't immersive sims, but the problem is, when you say you're part of a genre, you're asking to be judged on that genre, right? Call yourself a horror game, and no one's getting scared. Doesn't matter how great your game is. Your game's crap. So yeah, genre, immersive sim, all of that important, but be careful. That's all I really got to go on with that.